Welcome back to the 1-0 Pod, brought to you by Penn State Student Affairs. I'm Seth Engle.
And I'm Zach Allen.
And we are back with another show. We have Maryland coming up this weekend. We're going to hit the road tomorrow. So that should be fun, hitting the road again after a brief hiatus and quick stay in Happy Valley here. Zach, we got a lot to discuss here. The Big Ten schedule just dropped. We're going to talk about that and discuss the dates and Penn State's tough 5-game stretch right in the middle of the season there. We're going to talk about James Franklin not apologizing for winning despite, a struggle against Indiana. And we'll conclude by talking about wide receivers, Drew Aller, and give a little preview on Maryland there. I want to start off with the most recent kind of news that we had yesterday with Franklin. After practice, goes on this long tangent. He's not apologizing for winning. He wanted to make that very clear. Called out a couple teams that had lost to unranked opponents. You think he's right in saying that? I kind of understand where he's coming from, where he says you can't be dominant in every single game you play, which is fair. But when you almost lose, you came minutes away from losing to Indiana. There are some clear struggles there. Do you kind of take Franklin's side there and his point that he was making, or do you think, he should be apologizing for making that game as close as it was?
I mean, I would say I more agree with him just because at the end of the day, a win is a win. It isn't a loss. And he did say, we have to learn from our wins too. And I think on Tuesday he said, Devon Ellis kind of stood up in front of the team. And, the team knows that was not their best performance. So I kind of get his point on not apologizing for a win. But at the same time, it doesn't take away the concern. You can't just say, oh, we won, that's it, to a team that hasn't beaten a Big Ten team. And like you said, there were under 3 minutes left and the game was tied. And then, Drew Allard throws the deep shot to Keandre Lambert-Smith, followed up by a safety. A couple plays later, and all is well. They escape with a win, but it still was just a very concerning game. And although I see where he's coming from, and I would kind of more lean on James Franklin's side, where I don't think it's really necessary for him to say, "Oh, hey, Penn State Nation, I'm sorry that we won." Like it really doesn't make sense to apologize for it, but there still is that concern there.
I'll tell you my problem with it. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but if you look at the whole quote here, and this was the part that really stood out to me, was he goes on this tangent, and he starts it off. He says, there are so many examples. There's teams that are ranked number 1, 2, 3 in the country, and they struggle to get a win, and no one talks about it. But when we struggle to get a win, or it's not as pretty, then everybody's, overly concerned, in my opinion. It's a long season. You're not going to dominate every single week. I'm standing there at this press conference, and I'm just saying, what? We had gone for 10 minutes already, answered the regular questions about why the wide receiver room was struggling, development of, Drew Aller, all that good stuff. And then all of a sudden he breaks out with something like this. And I'm like, why is this being discussed right now? Why is this on your mind when you're playing Michigan in 2 weeks in a game that you have to win for a debut in the college football playoff? And if they lose that game, I mean, they're done for the 4-team format. It will have been a failure in that era. And somehow this is on his mind that teams are, or maybe critics are pointing at Penn State more than other teams in the country is just something I didn't necessarily understand.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily true either, because before, even outside of the Big Ten, before Georgia beat the brakes off Kentucky, people were saying, oh, maybe Georgia's not that good. And I think one of the reasons people thought this was the year Penn State could beat Ohio State was Ohio State didn't have a great performance against Indiana either. So I don't think it's like Penn State has a bad performance and then people just criticize only Penn State for it. There have been examples of, Ohio State being criticized against the same opponent and even teams in other conferences. So I agree with you where that's maybe a little bit of a disagreeable statement.
Yeah, no, and to your point too, like I do get, like I look at Florida State as a game where when Florida State played Boston College early in the year and they won by 2 points, that's a game to me that's like, okay, I see where he's coming from, and this is a top 4 team that's kind of projected to make the playoffs right now. That was very close to falling to a very mediocre program. So I see that side of it. I look at some of Ohio State's struggles. Like, we're a week removed from Ohio State being, they were tied with Wisconsin in the third quarter. Ultimately, they stormed ahead and won, as they have in various games this season. Maryland, another example. But it's just interesting to me that, this is what he's kind of focused on right now, especially considering, like, he's 1-9 against Ohio State. That is why there is criticism. If you're really questioning why people are criticizing James Franklin and Penn State after going 1-9 against Ohio State and not beating the Buckeyes since 2016, like, I'm not saying he has to look himself in the mirror, but like, it's not too hard to kind of figure that out. Like, that is where the criticism is coming from, and it is criticism that wasn't there before they lost to Ohio State.
Yeah.
And it has all spanned from that loss. Now I'm going to move forward a little bit. Like he said, you're not going to dominate every game. They came close against Indiana, almost too close. Moving forward, this team needs to improve. This is a group on offense that has just completely underperformed. Your thoughts on the wide receivers now with Harrison Wallace likely out again, Drew Aller throwing that deep ball to end it. Is there a connection now? Like, was that game-winning touchdown between Aller and Keontre, was that the start of something new, or what do you take away from that?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said one pass at the end of the game against Indiana shows that Penn State has turned it around. I mean, if you look at the stats, Brendan Sorsby had a better game than Drew Aller. I mean, I know his stats were kind of inflated because he had a 90-yard touchdown and an almost 70-yard touchdown. But, just because he had one deep pass that we've been waiting for about six weeks now, you can't just say, oh, that means Penn State's turned it around. It very well could lead to a turnaround because you said Harrison Wallace is injured. He is. We saw him in a sling, but they did that without him on the field either. So it could be a sign, but I don't think it should be a thing where it's like, oh, they hit one deep pass since West Virginia for a touchdown. That means they have a complete offensive overhaul. Because, I mean, the drive before that, Drew threw his first interception as a college quarterback. And I think, we've seen takes on social media where it's like, I think Drew just needed to throw that first interception and maybe he won't, try and be perfect and be a little more risky. Who knows if that's actually what happened? I mean, it could be a good sign. I think, making that first mistake can be crucial for a player. And, he rebounded from it. But I think we're going to have to see against Maryland if this offense has really improved. Have you heard about the Student News Readership Program here at Penn State? You can stay informed with credible news sources like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, all for free. You heard that right. Free access to credible news that matters. Stay in the loop, ace your assignments, and be in the know about the world around us. Use your Penn State email to sign up for the Student News Readership Program and unlock a world of information at your fingertips.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said, it was a 52-yard touchdown pass. And it was the first 50-yard pass by Drew Aller since his second pass attempt as a starter, which was week 1 against West Virginia. It has been a long time coming for Drew Aller and this wide receiver core, which is, has not had Harrison Wallace for portions of the year and will likely be without him again, as I said, against Maryland. I think there's a lot of finger pointing right now. No one really knows what's going on. This is obviously a good Penn State team, not nearly as good as maybe we thought they were at the beginning of the year, or even through 6 games this year. Who are you pointing the finger at this year? Is it the wide receivers? Is it Marcus Hagans? Is it Drew Aller? Is it Mike Yurcich? Is it James Franklin? Like, whose fault is it right now? What went wrong, and who's kind of leading the pack of whose fault it is?
you know, I feel like it's really a mix of all three because against Ohio State, they didn't have their top cornerback, but there wasn't a lot of separation at the top of those routes, and that's something James Franklin has said. He's been saying, someone needs to give Drew a place to throw, but then by the same token, there were screen passes that Drew Aller was missing, and those have been uncharacteristic of him this season. But I think it's a little bit of everybody, honestly. I feel like everything kind of just seems out of whack. And, like you said earlier, I think the Ohio State game really kind of revealed all that. Because, again, there was those two plays where Nick Singleton had two 15-yard runs at least. And then it just seemed like, the running game wasn't there for the rest of the game. So I think it's a little bit of everything, and that's why Harrison Wallace's injury is now even more problematic with Michigan coming up in 2 weeks. And Maryland's no slouch either. I know they lost to Northwestern, but there is some concern. I mean, you can't blame, I don't think, an offensive lack of production just on, hey, one player, or it's Keandre Lambert-Smith's fault. I think it's a little bit of everything, and I guess it starts with receivers not getting open, but then if you don't hit those passes when they're open, or don't dial up the correct play call, then it also goes along with that. So I think it's all three facets of that.
Well, it's definitely not Keandre Lambert-Smith's fault.
No,
I'll say that.
No, that was just an example. Keandre, I was not calling you out whatsoever.
I think, yeah, he's the least of it. That wide receiver core is terrible. I'm just going to go out on a limb. It's been bad. It's been terrible. I thought when they brought in Malik McClain and Dante Cephas, this was a group that was going to be able to do some stuff. It was like bringing in Mitchell Tinsley, who's not, the greatest receiver by any means, but he's a good complementary piece who's able to get open and make some things happen. And no one has been able to step up. It's been the same thing since the summer. We've talked about it every week when we record. No one has stepped up. James Franklin has said the same thing since the summer. No one's stepping up in that number 3 spot, which is really a number 2 spot since Harrison Wallace has only played a few games this year. Now he's out again. Who's it going to be? It's not Keandre Lambert-Smith's fault. If you're Drew Aller, think about it. You're a first-year starting quarterback, and you're trying to hit these wide receivers who can't get open at all. You're a first-year starting quarterback. You're going to make some mistakes, like you said. I mean, there's some uncharacteristic kind of missed passes he had on certain checkdowns and overthrows, and we've seen that. But it's a first-year starting quarterback. It's not the most surprising thing in the world. The problem is when you're a first-year starting quarterback and you're seeing nothing. There's no one open except for Keandre Lambert-Smith. And even he's not getting open all the time because it's hard to get open all the time. You're supposed to, kind of have your other guys to rely on there, and that has just not been the case. So the it's the receiving core.
It's been some slow development.
Yeah, it's
for sure.
Yeah, it's been bad. But anyway, it has to improve. And I don't know how the wide receiver room could improve unless they get some crazy guy in the transfer portal, because they have these young guys who it doesn't look like have really
played at all.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they've really shown any superstar potential. But next year with that Big Ten schedule, which was actually released today, where we have the dates finally of the Big Ten schedule. We'll discuss that. That receiving core needs to step up. It looks like that could be the thing again next year that holds back Penn State. So let's move on. Let's talk about this schedule a little bit. Penn State, this is in order of when they play them. This is their Big Ten schedule. They're going to have Illinois, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, Maryland. So, Zach, this is big for James Franklin.
Yeah.
This is one less thing that he can complain about at his press conferences. Is opening Big Ten play at home, first time in 9 years of 2024. How big is this for James Franklin?
I wish I was going to still be on the beat next year for the Collegian just to see the joy of having, the opening game being a home game, which is weird. But, you know, I feel like that's kind of secondary to that middle chunk of their schedule where, like you said, it's what, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Ohio State, and then Washington. I mean, that's just, there's the bye weeks after the USC game, but that even still, that's just a gauntlet of a schedule. Like you said, with, we'll see what development the receiver room has, but also the loss of talent that Penn State's going to have up front on the offensive line and in the secondary. That's just that's a tough schedule. That's really tough. And, there's no divisions anymore where, a Big Ten West team could go 9-3 and make it to the Big Ten championship. Like Penn State's going to need to, really step it up next year.
Yeah, this goes back to something we talked about. I think it was last month when the actual schedule came out of just the opponents. Was that this is the year? 2023. This was the year. This is before they played Ohio State, obviously. Missed opportunity. Next year, it is going to be hard, and I do not see that receiving core getting much better. So, I mean, that 5-game stretch is quite remarkable. It's going to be difficult for Penn State. It's going to be difficult for everyone in the conference, but especially Penn State, where it's kind of like it's funny to me because I think about James Franklin, has maybe annoyed the conference so much that they're like, okay, here, take your home game to open the Big Ten slate, but we're going to throw you these 5 games right in the middle of the season. And you're going to get one bye, but this is going to be all consecutive. So this is your season. So I don't know if he's like, he can't be too satisfied looking at the schedule right now. Like maybe, I don't know. But that would just be funny. It's funny to me to just think about the Big Ten kind of handing that to him.
Yeah, and the bye week, right out of the bye, it's away at Wisconsin. That's
Right.
not, and that's the easiest game, and it's not a gimme whatsoever.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. They'll play Maryland next year, which is kind of nice to sprinkle in a little bit of a, okay, this is a consistent rival. You're not going to have your rivals like the rest of the Big Ten teams have it, but this is a regional guy you're going to open up this new expanded conference with. Maryland, they play on Saturday. What are we looking at there? There's a lot that I'm looking at from Penn State, I think, on the offensive side of the ball. What are you primarily looking at from Penn State other than for them to get a win?
I think the big talking point is going to be the offense, but I feel like the defense has to, shake off that Indiana performance a little bit. I mean, there were 2 blown coverages, but, you can't do that against Talia Tagovailoa and these Maryland receivers who made plays against Ohio State. Whether that'll be a fluke game against Indiana, which, I think I likely expect it to be, I still think it's, something to watch going forward because Indiana was the most points that Penn State allowed all season, and I don't think, anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, viewers out there, if anyone expected that because Indiana was they had the least amount of points per game and entering the Penn State game, and they scored 24. There were some extended drives there. Obviously, they got great field position, but I not to keep harping on the offense. Obviously, that's like the primary thing you have to look for. But if there's another thing, I think it's the defense.
Yeah, no, I think defense needs to improve. They've looked good all year. I mean, I feel like when Franklin talks about, okay, you can't be dominant in every game, like I was thinking about the defense in that scenario where I'm like, okay, this defense has been insane the whole year, even against an Ohio State offense that, kind of dons maybe the best player in the whole country in Marvin Harrison Jr., who did have a great game, but they locked down pretty much the rest of that unit. So, yeah, defense, looking for that to improve. Me personally, I'm looking at Dante Cephas here. This is a guy who came in. He was supposed to be the man. Yeah. He came from Kent State. He was one of the top receivers in the MAC, and he has just not been enough for Penn State. He hasn't had a game with 3 receptions, with Harrison Wallace out. We talked to Dante last night. He said the hardest part of his transition was learning the plays and adjusting to Yursic's playbook. And I asked him, like, right now, do you understand the plays? Like, are you up to speed on that? And he says he is. So I want to see that. It's been 8 weeks. Does he understand the playbook? Is he able to make an impact beside Keontre Lambert-Smith? We will see. We will see whether Drew Aller is a new and improved quarterback now, like so many are saying he could be after throwing his first interception and his first 50-yard pass in months. Score prediction. What do you got?
I'm going to go Penn State 33 like last week, Maryland 28. I think it's going to be a close game considering Maryland's at home. Then again, there have been games where Maryland thought they had a chance and then they got blown out. But I just think the lack of offensive production keeps games in. And like we saw last week, if the defense sputters at all, it could be trouble for Penn State. But, in the end, I think they'll be able to pull out a win over a Maryland team that just lost to Northwestern last week.
Yeah, I got it close too. I've not been not too confident in this Penn State offense at all at this point. It looks like they've gotten worse over time. I think Maryland losing 3 games in a row, I think they're hungry for a win. I think Penn State's going to pull it out, but I think it's going to be close. I got Penn State 30, Maryland 21. It's gonna get a bit scary in College Park, but we'll see. We'll see about that. We'll see if the receiving corps does actually step up, because they could. You never know.
They could. You never know. We'll see.
Absolutely. That'll do it for us today. 1-0 pod. We'll get you guys back here next week after we return from Maryland. Thanks again to Student Affairs for sponsoring this episode.